Greetings, this is the lecture for Management 430. The topic is training. Training is another tool that we use for performance management. It differs a little bit from development, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, but training is really about how do we make sure our employees have the skills and abilities they need to do their jobs today. So we'll get into some detail about what that looks like, how it differs from development, and what the training process actually looks like in general. Slide number 2 is the flowchart that we've been using to orient ourselves through the course. And you can see where we're at. We're covering on the upper right hand corner of the implementation box, training and career management. This is all part of performance management, obviously, because one of the most important things we can do to improve performance, of course, is to train people or to help develop them to have a better career. But it has a special topic all on its own, just as we have our own course here at SIUE that's specifically for training and development. So moving on to the next page. Training and development, as you can see here, is an important definition. It's how we enhance the skills and abilities of workers to improve their performance, to enhance their performance. And we can do this at the individual, the team, and at the organizational level. We need to be thinking about this at multiple levels, and certainly based on what our strategic needs are in the organization. In terms of the next slide, what is training versus what is development? How do they differ? For training, it's a focus on the current, the here and now. What do we need in this moment for someone to be able to do their job and to be functional at their job right now? The scope is looking at individual employees and specifically what they need. Because it's an immediate, what we need right now in the immediate position, not current jobs or future jobs. It's what we need right now in this moment. And we're looking at skill deficits, getting rid of any gaps between what we want and what they need to do their job right now in this moment. Development, the focus is on current and future jobs. It's looking to the future and what we might need people to do in this moment, but also what we need them to do perhaps in the future. So we need to be thinking more strategically in predicting where we want people to go, what we want our organization to look like in the next few years. The scope is much more focused on work groups and organizations and how the whole unit is going to work together. Obviously, we think about individual development as well because there's career paths and things like that we need to be addressing. But we also are focused on work groups and organization level issues. The time frame is much more long term. You know, we're talking about now, a month from now, a year from now, several years from now, how we help people on a career path so that they're satisfied with what they're doing, and how we help work groups and our organization to be developed in a way that we are going to meet all our strategic needs in the future. And of course, as it says there, the goal is to prepare for future work demands. Legal considerations, of course, just as we talked about this with compensation and pay for performance and selection and recruiting, we also have legal considerations here. And there's 5 pretty important ones that we need to make sure are clear. Number 1, that training opportunities are available to everyone, not just to certain groups of people. And we want to make sure that we're doing a very good job of communicating training opportunities so that everybody has an equal opportunity to get the training that they need to do their job. We want to also make sure that we're clear about what the entry requirements are for the training programs, just as we would have to be careful about the entry requirements for people to enter our company. We're concerned about adverse impact, where we might set standards perhaps too high, or we might have differential standards for people with disparate treatment. We do have to be careful of the very same thing with training. We want to make sure that we're not having an adverse impact on the individuals who want to access the training programs, that we're setting standards too high and that certain groups are not getting access to it. And we want to make sure we're not treating some groups purposefully different than others in terms of getting access to training. And remember the example I gave you in class about how my boss didn't want to pay for training for me to do budgets and accounting, which was an important part of my job, yet they were paying for people to take conversational French classes and get trained for their CPA. And so what they were doing in that situation is they were setting differential standards for training. Even though they said they didn't do any training, I knew that they were paying for training for some people and they were not paying for training for others, including myself. So they had differential standards, and as I've already communicated to you, those differential standards, when they're known, definitely have an impact on morale. Item number 3 under legal considerations, we need to be able to evaluate our training programs to make sure they have the impact that we want them to have. And we want to make sure that they're not having an adverse impact or a negative impact for individuals in terms of their training programs. So everybody has to have the opportunity to evaluate it so that we get appropriate feedback from not only the ones that benefited from it, but also from the ones that perhaps may not have benefited from the training programs. We want to make sure that our training facilities are comparable. We don't want to have a situation where it's separate but equal, where we have one group of people has a really nice facility with the most optimal learning environment possible for adult learning, and then have other groups where it's chaotic and dirty and messy and noisy and hot, and it makes it very difficult to learn, because then you cannot compare how good your training was if one group of people doesn't have the same sort of comfortable environment in which to learn, and yet and the other group is doing extraordinarily well. And that might be based on geographic region, and that geographic region may certainly have links to issues of socioeconomic class or things like that. So we want to make sure that our training facilities are comparable, that what we have in one location is at least comparable in another location. Next, we have to look at our pass-fail ratios. Just as like we would look at, who would pass the tests and who would fail the tests in terms of gaining entrance to our organization, we have to do the same thing. Pass-fail ratios of people when it comes to the tests, to the training that they're engaged in, to see whether or not there are some groups that are not learning as well than others, and we want to make sure that we're addressing some of those needs, whereas women and minorities may struggle a little bit more with the training programs than white males. And so if they're having a struggle with that, why might that be? Okay, the next slide. How to defend and protect ourselves against a discrimination charge. There's a number of different things we should be aware of. Number one, we want to make sure that if we have an affirmative action plan and apprenticeship training, that we register our plan with the Department of Labor. Now, the registration, you wonder why we're talking about affirmative action and apprenticeship training here in this context. Well, apprenticeship training is fairly straightforward. Obviously, when we get somebody new into the company and they're learning a skill, where they're considered an apprentice, and we'll talk a little bit more about apprenticeship later on in this lecture, but we want to make sure that, that the training is registered, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what our intentions are, and what the outcomes are, and that's all should be registered with, OFCCP. The affirmative action, remember, affirmative action is about attracting and preparing qualified individuals for jobs. So affirmative action will allow us then to target individuals that need training needs, to prepare them to be promoted into our company, either hired into our company or promoted within our company. So we want to make sure that everybody in our company has access to appropriate training. So if we're engaged in affirmative action, voluntarily, or even if we're ordered to do it, or if we're required to do it because of, we're a federal contractor, register your training. And this way you can demonstrate that the training that you're engaged in is consistent with what the federal government is expecting of you with respect to affirmative action and other types of programs. And this way it's a layer of protection that if the federal government believes what you're doing is appropriate, it helps to create a layer of protection for you. We want to document, item number 2 is documenting who enrolls in our training program. We want to document who we've made offers to for training, and then who took advantage of the training and actually enrolled. Because a lot of people will complain that they didn't get training opportunities, but they forget the fact that offers were made to them and they refused them. So we want to make sure that we keep track of who was offered the training and then who actually enrolled, so we have an ongoing record of that. We also want to look at the decisions, the management decisions that are made when people are engaged in training. Are we documenting who gets opportunities then for promotion? Are we documenting, what their development process or training process is going to be like, so that when we are done with the training, what do we do with that? What do we, as managers, do with these individuals now that they're trained? Do we encourage them to practice those skills, that give them opportunities to use those skills? Do we allow them opportunities for promotion and other forms of development? Or do we simply say, thanks for taking the training and letting it go from there? It's also important that we monitor each trainee's progress to make sure that they're actually performing the way we want them to perform. This is part of the follow-up that we do when we do training and development, is ensuring that they are actually getting the skills that they need. And then, of course, as part of our monitoring their progress, we also have to evaluate the success of the training. Did they learn? Did they pass the test? Did they apply it to their job? And did this use of this skill help the bottom line of the company in the long run? Next slide. The critical skills that employers want. 6 basic skills that employers are looking for. Trainability. Can you learn? Can you be trained? Can you develop new skills? Are you willing to learn more? Do you have a learning orientation as you enter your company? Communication skills, both written and oral. Do you have the ability to speak clearly and concisely? Are your writing skills important? And this is one of those important things that I regularly reinforce in our in the grading of papers for you guys. You have to make sure that you are writing in a way that's clear. Be careful of run-on sentences and split infinitives and all those things, because it makes you look like you don't understand how to communicate. So working on and improving your communication skills is key. Adaptability. Are you adaptable? Are you flexible? When new challenges face you, are you willing to change and to adapt and to do what you need to do to get something done? So if someone throws you a curveball, can you make the change needed to do that? Self-management. Are we able to be self-starters? Can we manage our emotions? Can we manage ourselves? Can we set our own priorities? Can we make sure that we get our jobs done without someone constantly reminding us that we need to get it done, get it done, get it done? Self-management is important. Group effectiveness, right? That hasn't changed in a number of years. We need people to learn how to work well in teams. We reinforce it across the curriculum, in your schooling. You start learning how to work in teams when you're, in K through 12, and it gets reinforced throughout college. The ability to cooperate, the ability to communicate, the ability to give appropriate feedback to people, the ability to marshal everybody together in the same direction to get a project done is also an important part of group effectiveness. Leadership skills, also really, really important. Can we ensure that, not that we're a big L leader, in that not everybody's going to be, an important leader. Sometimes someone just needs to be a self-leader. They need to demonstrate through self-management and being a good role model to the people around them. So leadership isn't just, am I good at managing the people behind me and being some sort of charismatic leader? We're also talking about, can you behave in a way where you're a good role model in terms of your work ethic and your moral and ethical behavior in the company, and the initiative that you take and the example that you set for working hard, and those are the keys. That's what we want to be doing in this circumstances, is making sure that we are good with our employees, but also that we are a good role model, even if we're not a manager or leader, to those around us. Our next slide focuses on the different types of training programs that are available out there. And there's general training, and then there's company-specific training. General training are things that are not specific to any particular organization. For example, learning basic computer skills. Can you use a word processing program and a spreadsheet program and perhaps a database program? Customer service skills. It doesn't matter what company you work for, there are basic skills needed in order to do customer service, being able to answer their questions, being able to calm them down if they're agitated, basic capabilities of smoothing people over. Management skills, development skills. Management skills are the same company to company, and they're obviously going to MBA programs and learning some basic managerial skills. These are essential no matter where you go. It's the same basic ideas anywhere you go. Remedial education, also reading, writing, and arithmetic, helping people with literacy, basic literacy. That is something that is not specific to any company, but if people don't have basic literacy, they can't engage in the workforce. So being able to do that is important. And then sales training. One of the best sales training programs comes out of Xerox. Xerox used to make some of the best, photocopiers in the world, and eventually Canon and a few other companies overtook them. We still call it making Xerox copies because that name is sort of stuck. But Xerox in time became known for their sales management, sales training courses, versus known for making copy machines. And anybody could go to sales training. I've known people who worked for a nonprofit organization that ran blood drives that went to the Xerox sales training course because it learned general sales skills that were important to be used in any organization. The next slide. In terms of the company-specific training, this is training that's very unique to a particular organization. Doing performance appraisals are unique to a company. Product knowledge is unique to a company. New equipment is unique to a company. Safety training and the specific procedures for my company. And then orientation programs and how they are specific and unique to my company. Carrying on with the discussion about orientation programs, there are a number of different goals that orientation programs hold. There are, of course, the training goals, making sure people have the basic skills that they need to get up and running and working in the company. But second, the issue of socialization and making sure that people have the tools to connect with key individuals in the company, knowing who's important, knowing who they need to talk to with respect to getting things done, and just making them feel like they are a part of this overall organization. And if you can recall, your first few days, coming to the SIUE campus and learning about where do I go, and where's the registrar, and where's the bursar, and where's the gym, and where's my dorm, and how do I get to know my roommate. These are all things that are handled in an orientation program. Learning about your roommate, learning about the ways to connect with people and how important that is. The benefits, of course, of orientation programs that we do have lower turnover. If you have an active socialization program where people are trained on what they need to get up and running right away, people are less likely to be agitated, they're less disappointed in the company, and they are less likely to leave in a short period of time. They have higher morale. They like what they do. There's a better learning orientation because when you start them right from the beginning about how do we learn, how do we grow, how do we learn, how do we grow, they will continue that attitude throughout time. It also lowers anxiety. And remember, again, the first time you walked onto campus, the level of anxiety that you might have engaged in and had, because it's someplace new. It's a different level of expectation with respect to college. You may be, a bunch of miles away from home, and even if you're not away from, far away from home. What if you're from Edwardsville? The point is that, you're now in a different place, different expectations. You're a grown-up. You have to self-manage, and it's a very challenging place to be. Next slide on orientation programs. There's a basic checklist of some of the things that you should cover in an orientation program. Obviously, you want to make sure you're introducing key players, introducing all the people being oriented to each other, and let them know who they can talk to and who's new and exciting and people to connect with. Explanations of job procedures, duties, and responsibilities. They need to know what the expectations are. We want to make sure that they understand what the management team expects of them in terms of performance appraisals, not just what the procedures are of their job, but what the higher level expectations are for the level of performance that they want to see from people. Then if there are certain policies and practices and procedures that need to be understood, typically we review the employee manual that talks about the company rules and policies, and so to make sure everybody's very clear in what the expectations are. Can you smoke? Can you have a tattoo? All those things we talked about when we talked about employee rights versus management rights. Work unit and organizational culture. Do you understand what the culture is in your company, and particularly of your unit, and who's got power, and how do we what's the expectations in terms of the way people interact with each other, in terms of work ethic and things like that. And the other thing too is making sure people understand how to help and encourage others in that process. Moving on to the next slide, the instruction system model. The instruction system model is how we engage in training in the company. The first thing that we need to do in any situation is to do a needs assessment, a needs analysis. We need to then figure out what are our needs, where are the problems. We need to do some research at the organization level, in terms of the policies and what the organization needs, and at the task level, how are the tasks getting done, and then the people level, are the people prepared to perform the tasks that are needed to meet organizational goals. When we get into those needs assessment, we may go in thinking that we need one thing, and we may come out thinking that we need something entirely different. And a great example of this, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in class before, was a company that I knew of that was working with meat packers, and they couldn't understand why they couldn't keep the meat cutters, the meat packers, working well in their company. So they constantly lost them. There was constant turnover. So they said, well, maybe we just need to train them better. So they decided, let's set up a training program and get that to work. So they brought in these training specialists, and the training specialists said, well, let's analyze what we're doing first and see how things are going. So they started with looking at how people were hired, and how they trained them, and looking at the whole range of things from the moment they make contact with the applicant to the point where they decide to leave. And so they analyzed the whole process, and what they found out is when they were hiring people, they were using selection tests that were good for hiring clerical workers, not good for hiring people who work with their hands to cut meat and to pack meat and to ship it off to other places. And so they were training people fine, but these people didn't have the basic skills needed to be able to do meat packing. They were not good with eye-hand coordination in being able to cut meat the way that they needed to be cut, and to manage those kinds of things. So once they assessed that, they were able to look at it and go, oh, just change our selection procedure and everything else should work fine. So that's a good example of what happens with needs assessment. Sometimes you go into it and recognize it's not a training problem, and it might be a selection problem. And then once you fix that, then you can fix the problems that you have, in the outcomes. So Let's, though, assume that maybe the problem is that we need to train people in a different way than we've been doing in the past. And then we need to set up what we call our instructional objectives, and we make a decision. These are what we need to accomplish in this training program. So moving on to the next slide, then once we have developed our expectations in terms of the training and what our objectives are, then we have to design our training program and implement it. We have to decide whether we're going to do on-the-job training or off-site training or on-site but not on-the-job training. And we've got a number of different tools that we can use. On-the-job training are things like the apprenticeship training. And apprenticeship training, as you know, is a novice comes in, they learn something new, and they learn by following somebody around and getting the opportunity to practice those skills. Internships work the same way. It's a form of an apprenticeship training. And apprenticeships have been around since medieval times, right? When we've learned about this, when you were training knights or when you're training people to have particular skills, you had, an apprentice who would come in and have to learn a basic skill, and then that apprentice would move on, become a journeyman, and they'd learn skills from other people, and then ultimately they would move up and they would become master craftspeople. And then they would set up their own shop, and then they would train other people. And that's basically how it works, even in the crafts and trades. If you want to be a carpenter, you start out as an apprentice. You want to be an electrician, you start out as an apprentice. You want to be an HR professional, you start out as get an internship and learn those things. Job rotation, we've talked about this. We rotate into different positions to learn as much as possible. And then mentoring programs are also a great job, on-the-job training, where our mentor will help us to learn about the ins and outs of a particular job. On-site but not on the job are things like videos and teleconferences and computer-based trainings and internet or intranet-based training. All these things, simulations. In essence, what you're doing is, are you engaged in some sort of simulation that's on your job company site, but you're not necessarily learning on the job. And then we have off-site training, formal courses that you could take, going to continuing education programs or getting your undergrad or graduate degree in a particular area. Simulations like you're doing right now with the HR simulation, or doing wilderness trips to help people connect with other people, learning team trust, teamsmanship, group process, those kinds of things. The problem with a lot of these sort of off-site trainings is that we want to make sure that the skills are reinforced once people get back to the company. So the final part of our instructional model is thinking about the evaluation process, because once we've done our needs analysis, we've implemented our training, we need to then look at our instructional system model and deciding whether or not our instructional system is actually working. So a couple of ways that we can measure the effectiveness. Number one is through Kirkpatrick's 4 levels. One is reaction. How do people react to the training? Did they like it? Was the food good? Was the environment friendly? Did they feel comfortable, in that training process? The next one is, did they actually learn? Did they learn what they were supposed to learn? Did they pass the test? Then, does it change behavior? Does it change what you do on the job? And then ultimately, do the results of the training have an impact on the company and the company's bottom line? And some of the things that we can do for assessing that particularly that last aspect, is cost-benefit analyses, return on investment, and benchmark training. Those are ways that we can evaluate whether or not the training has had the strategic impact that we want. We should also evaluate through a design method. We can just measure after the training to see what they've learned. We could do a pre and post measure to see what they knew before versus after. We could also do pre and post with a control group. And the whole idea is, if you remember from your scientific method courses, that we have a control group that doesn't go through the training, and then you have another group that goes through the training, and they're measured before and after the training. And the whole point is that the experimental group should have a higher after score than the control group. Other things that we want to assess in terms of our training goals is, do we want to have training validity? Did people learn? And that goes to Kirkpatrick's 2nd level. The training validity is, did people actually learn, what we wanted them to learn? And so we need to assess that, just as we would assess for selection validity, or we want to select for training validity. Transfer validity. This is Kirkpatrick's third level. Did they take the information they learned in the class and transfer that to learning on the job? And actually practice it on the job. And then intra or inter-organizational validity, where within the company or between companies, the training works in multiple locations. And all of these are important aspects of assessing our instructional system model.